Let's get more from Flavio Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association in Canada. Flavio, thanks for joining us. Is this ultimately the U.S. agenda, just have no cars made in Canada?
Well, it might be Howard Lutnick, and I think that's important. He is the Secretary of Commerce, but he also tends to be a bit of a mouthpiece. What was important in yesterday's context was it just came out of what I think we all saw to be a better relationship context in that Oval Office meeting. We heard, of course, in the Mike Locatore's report there, that the Americans are interested in Keystone. They're interested in movement on aluminum because what they've done to the spot price and their dependence on us. We've had tariffs on cars now in this country for a couple of quarters now, and we need relief. And so if we're finally getting to a sectoral tariff discussion, it's important that we don't unbundle the industrial targets in this country so that the Americans get what they want, and then we fight the auto fight another day. The Prime Minister spoke at that same conference a couple of hours later and said, no, USMCA is very important for the competitiveness of U.S. and Canadian automotive. And so, we need that assurance that Team Canada isn't going to move away from it. But I think we're all kind of slack-jawed in that room at the level of candor disconnected from data that comes from, really the number 2 guy in that administration on sectoral tariffs. We have to stick together. The Team Canada enterprise here, the negotiating posture has to be that if the Americans want something, it's got to be in return for something that we need and not push it off, especially if this is what they think about auto assembly.
I mean, this is radical. Obviously, it's been a crucial component of Ontario's industrial base for decades. But do we have to start really rethinking automaking in this country and realize that the American agenda here is just pulling the plants out of this country?
Well, I'm one of those people that wakes up every day and says, how are we going to make sure that doesn't happen? He specifically characterizes the Canadian auto plants as something that happened as we helped hollow out Detroit. That's not tied to the truth. Ford has been making cars in Windsor since it was a 1-year-old startup in 1904. We helped build up Detroit, and our peak auto year was 1998, where we made 3.1 million cars. We were lucky to make half of that this year. Canada, Ontario, Oshawa to Windsor are tied directly to Detroit. The Center for Automotive Research in Michigan last week said the White House's imposition of a tariff regime is going to cost the American auto sector $188 billion over 3 years. So there's the truth, and then there's the position of the Commerce Secretary. The problem is the truth doesn't speak for itself. It has to be platformed. And so we'll do that every day. One of the ways that we do that is continue to implore our partners in Detroit to not just say, hey, by the way, we're piling up billions of dollars of losses. What are you going to do about it? The recklessness of this is going to bankrupt one of the Detroit automakers or some of their brand lines. If you pull the automaking out of Canada, you're also pulling $24 billion worth of U.S. auto parts exports into these Canadian plants last year, and about $10 billion worth of U.S. raw materials. It's nuts. But we got to stand up every day and speak the truth into the record. And hopefully Team Canada, Mark Carney, can help. Even if we don't convince them on automotive, we're going to convince them that, hey, by the way, the cost of that oil that you want is going to be that you leave Windsor well alone.
It's interesting you touch on that. I mean, the Americans need our oil, and that was one of the crucial drivers for the original North American Free Trade Agreement, that the Americans would not get cut off from our oil. Is it time to start really talking tough and threatening to cut off oil shipments to the United States or hike the price, an export tax?
No, but I think we need to be rather firm about it. Before I get the Danielle Smith all upset here, we listened to Doug Ford say yesterday, hey, by the way, the other things you need from us are aluminum. You need it. 60% of the aluminum that the Americans use comes from Quebec. You need it. We need you to lay off. And in Ontario, he said, listen, we got critical minerals and electricity that you need. Nobody wants to cut you off. But maybe we will if you make us have to. And I think a reminder to every region of this country and every industry in this country is that it's the country's economy. And when we fought for exemption on auto parts, I came on your show and said, we'll never ask for a special exemption. We're never going to do a side deal. We got tariffs removed on auto parts because we hustled the truth and the data in the US and said, hey, by the way, you will shut your own industry down. So they quietly backed off that. I think right now, anybody who's in one of the sectors that, that the Americans smile and wink at should remember that ultimately you're part of Canada and Team Canada. And you can rely on us not to ask for any favor, but I'm expecting that we're not going to be vulnerable to somebody else's wink and a point.
You were involved in that initiative to develop a Canadian electric vehicle prototype. Is it time for us to step up those efforts and say we may have to just build up an independent vehicle industry? I know we're not going to create a Canadian General Motors or Ford, but do we have to start looking to ourselves more?
We absolutely do. We've made 120 million cars in this country the last 125 years. We know we can do it. We're taking a very deep dive on whether you can do that with a sustainable business model. Very, very quickly off the top, I always say, we're not going to build a publicly owned automaker. There's no point in charging taxes and then reinvesting taxes in a product that we sell back to the people we collect the taxes from. But in Mexico, President Sheinbaum said, one of the ways that we're going to build some insurance, is we're going to launch Olinea, which is a car company aimed at the growing Mexican consumer market and then good for export around the Americas. It's time that we take a very serious look here, and we do it dispassionately, that we're willing to walk away from it if the model doesn't work. But I've had enough of sitting around and waiting for somebody else to tell us what we can and cannot do. And we absolutely should do a lot of this for ourselves. And if we ultimately can't launch a car company because that's unsustainable, the exercise will show where our strengths are in mobility and hopefully open up a bunch of paths for capital there.
Flavio, on the Chinese electric car makers, I think you told us a while ago that you or the Canadian industry players have reached out to the Chinese and suggested opening factories in this country, but they didn't seem receptive.
Well, we spent a lot of time and effort. It was rather public. You could search it. 2016, 17, 18, we talked to the biggest automakers, Shanghai Automotive, specifically the biggest automaker in China per unit sold. And what we said was, look, if you're going to sell in North America, you got to manufacture here. The rules are the USMCA. At the time, it was NAFTA. And you're part of that is, look, you got to invest here and you got to buy from Canadian suppliers and Canadian raw material suppliers. I think those conversations were progressing very well until, of course, we executed an extradition request from the U.S. for the CFO of Huawei, and all those conversations stopped. I'm glad you asked that. Of course, we're always looking for investment here, but not investment that displaces Canadian suppliers and raw material suppliers. If you're going to invest here but send steel from China, what's the point? Send parts from China, what's the point? And why would we give up that market share while we're fighting for better treatment from Washington to somebody just to scratch an itch?
It's interesting, Flavio. You mentioned aluminum. The Americans need our aluminum, but they just went ahead and put massive tariffs on it, regardless of the extra cost it imposes on U.S. industry.
Yeah. Aluminum is an interesting case. You put a 50% tariff on imported aluminum. Well, the spot price in the U.S. went up 50%. So aluminum suppliers, manufacturers in the U.S. are profit taking. They're not using that extra margin to build new smelter capacity. ultimately, if they back off this thing, the U.S. Aluminum capacity is going to be in the same place it was a year ago. It's just not well thought out. It's nobody can understand what the objective is.
Flavio, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Flavio Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association.